I had just dropped off my friends after a quiet dinner on the west side of town. Nothing wild, just pasta and laughter, like we were trying to pause the stress of our final semester. I remember checking the clock on the dash. 10:47 p.m. My seatbelt was snug, the radio humming low, windows cracked just enough to let in the cool night air. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't swerving. I wasn't even singing along to the music like I usually did. The blue and red lights behind me felt like a thunderclap. They came out of nowhere. One moment I was cruising through a familiar neighborhood, and the next, my rearview mirror was flashing like a fire alarm. I pulled over immediately, hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2 like I was back in driver's edition. My heart thudded a little. Sure, but I wasn't afraid. I hadn't done anything wrong. Until the spotlight hit my mirror. Until I saw him. The officer approached with that wide-legged swagger that screamed superiority. He tapped on the glass harder than necessary, motioned for me to roll it down. I did, slow, deliberate, respectful. License and registration. I reached for the glove box, announcing my movements just like I was taught. My registration's in here, officer. I'm getting it now. He didn't answer, just watched me with narrowed eyes and a curled lip. As I handed him the documents, he looked me up and down. The painted nails, the small pride pin on my dashboard, the floral air freshener hanging from my mirror. He didn't say anything at first, but I saw it in his smirk. "You in a rush to your boyfriend's house tonight?" he finally said, voice low, mocking. "Or you just like cruising around in your glittery ride?" My stomach flipped. I blinked at him, trying to mask the burn behind my eyes. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of reacting. "No, sir. Just heading home." He looked over the papers, then back at me. "Any reason you were going a little fast back there?" I frowned. I wasn't speeding. I was going 35. The sign said 35. He stepped back and laughed like I just told a joke. "Oh, so now you're the one who sets the speed limits, huh?" My grip on the wheel tightened. I wanted to say something, really say something, but I knew better. I knew stories. I knew names. He went back to his cruiser for what felt like 10 minutes. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, replaying the moment again and again. Had I missed a stop sign? A signal? Was my tail light out? When he returned, he didn't bring a ticket. Just himself and a flashlight. "Step out of the vehicle." I hesitated, confused. "Is something wrong?" "Step out. Now." I obeyed. The night air hit me like a slap. My legs were stiff, hands shaking slightly. He asked if I'd had anything to drink. I said no. He told me to walk a straight line. I did. Cars passed, their headlights sweeping over me like judgment. A couple on the sidewalk paused. I saw them whispering, the woman pulling out her phone to record. I felt like an animal in a zoo, except even animals are treated with more curiosity than contempt. "Turn around." Hands on the hood. I froze. "Why?" "I haven't. Don't make me ask again." The hood of my car was still warm. My palms stung against the metal. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. He patted me down. Unnecessarily slow, lingering in ways that felt deliberate. Violating. When he was done, he stepped back, tossed my license on the driver's seat, and said, "Get back in. I'm feeling generous tonight." I climbed back in, fingers trembling as I reached for the ignition. No ticket. No warning.
No explanation.
Just, "Drive safe, princess." And then he was gone, swallowed back into the night, his cruiser fading in the mirror. I sat there for a while, engine idling. The steering wheel was damp from my grip. My heart hadn't slowed down. I didn't feel lucky. I felt small, ashamed, powerless. And worst of all, I felt invisible. Like I could disappear right there on the shoulder of Maple Street and no one would care. Except, someone would. But the officer didn't know that yet. The light from his flashlight was harsh, blinding. It wasn't enough to illuminate. It felt like it was meant to interrogate. He swept it over my face as if looking for something to accuse me of. "Eyes look a little glassy," he said, voice low and flat. "You on something tonight?" My mouth opened, then closed. No, sir. He kept the light on me, unblinking. You sure about that? Got anything in this glittery little car I should know about? He said glittery, like it was a slur. I swallowed hard. No, sir. There's nothing illegal in the vehicle. A heavy silence followed, thick with his unspoken threat. Then he clicked his tongue and motioned again. Step out. We'll do this the hard way. The hard way. I hadn't even done anything wrong, and somehow I was already guilty in his eyes. Of what? I didn't even know. Being too polite? Too quiet? Too gay? I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the pavement. It felt like the spotlight from his cruiser was aimed directly at my soul. He made me walk the line, heel to toe, under the glare of that artificial light. I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol. I hadn't even had dessert. But still, I wobbled slightly, not from drunkenness, but from the weight of being stared at like prey. He made me say the alphabet backward. I fumbled a few letters. Not because I couldn't, but because I was nervous. My breath kept catching in my throat. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. Try again, he barked. I caught a glimpse of movement behind him. A couple walking down the opposite sidewalk. They paused, clearly watching. I couldn't make out their expressions, but I saw one of them lift a phone. Recording. Great. Now I wasn't just being humiliated. I was being turned into content. The officer made a show of sniffing the air around me. You smell like a club. You been partying? No. I whispered, heat rising to my face. Speak up. No, sir. He circled me like a vulture. You boys always play the innocent ones, don't you? It was such a small word, but it shattered something in me. You boys. That tone. That twist of disgust. He wasn't just accusing me of something, he was reducing me to nothing. A soft breeze blew past. My shirt clung to my back with sweat. I could feel my legs shaking. Not from cold, not from guilt, but from humiliation. Pure and sharp and endless. Finally, after what felt like hours, he motioned back to the car. You can sit back down. Try not to swerve this time, huh? I obeyed. Inside, the warmth of the car should have comforted me, but it felt like a cage. My hands trembled as they rested on the steering wheel. The keys were still in the ignition, but I didn't start the engine. I looked into the rearview mirror and barely recognized myself. My eyes were wide, red-rimmed. My jaw clenched. I looked like someone who had been arrested, not someone who'd obeyed the law. He returned to the window, leaned in once more. Drive safe, sweetheart. I flinched. He walked back to his cruiser, slow and satisfied, like he'd just finished a meal. Then he sped off, leaving me in the wash of his taillights and spinning thoughts. I didn't drive right away. I sat there on the side of the road with my hazard lights blinking, trying to piece myself back together. Cars passed me. One slowed down. The woman in the passenger seat looked out her window with vague curiosity, then turned away like she was changing the channel. To them, it was just another traffic stop. To me, it was a strip search of my dignity. My phone buzzed. A text from Adam. Home safe? I stared at it. I wanted to respond with yes. I wanted to lie, but I couldn't. I wrote back. Can I come over? I don't want to be alone. I didn't even wait for a response. I turned the key, hands still shaking, and pulled back onto the road. Every time I saw headlights in my mirror, my heart jumped. I felt like I was still under a spotlight, like the officer had branded me with invisible ink that would never wash off. And underneath the fear, the trembling, there was something else building in me. Not just sadness, not even anger, rage. Hot, quiet, focused. He thought I was no one, just a kid with a pin on his dashboard and a soft voice. He thought he could make me small, make me silent. But what he didn't know, what he never even asked, was who I was. And more importantly, who my father was. Drive safe, princess. Those were his parting words. Not a ticket, not a warning, just that cruel smirk and those two words, sharpened like a knife. I didn't move, not for a full minute. My hands had gone numb from how tightly I'd been gripping the wheel. The engine hummed quietly, unaware of the war zone inside my chest. Eventually, I shifted into drive and pulled away from the shoulder. The road ahead was blurry. Not from rain, not from darkness, but from the tears I hadn't realized were falling. They came slow, then all at once, streaking down my cheeks like everything I'd held in was finally breaking free. My chest ached, not from fear anymore, but from something more hollow. Shame, humiliation, that gross, sticky feeling of knowing someone had power over you and enjoyed using it to make you feel worthless. I reached Adam's apartment in less than 10 minutes. I don't even remember the drive. Just lights and turns and silence. He met me at the door before I even knocked, like he'd been waiting there with his sixth sense buzzing. The second I stepped in, I fell apart. My knees buckled a little, and he caught me, arms wrapping around my waist, pulling me close. I clung to him like the ground was disappearing beneath me. Hey, I've got you," he whispered, guiding me to the couch. What happened? I sat, shaking, wiping my face with the back of my sleeve. I didn't even know where to begin, so I just started somewhere. He pulled me over. I wasn't doing anything wrong, and he just tore me apart. Adam's brows pulled tight. "What do you mean?" I told him everything. Slowly, I tripped over some words, skipped parts, then circled back. He sat there in tense silence, his hand gripping mine, his jaw clenched tighter with each new detail. He said stuff. I murmured, mocked me, kept calling me things, made me do a sobriety test even though I hadn't had a sip. And he touched me. Not in a... I paused, trying to steady my breath. Not in a violent way, but it was unnecessary, lingering, like he wanted to make sure I knew he was in charge. Adam's face was stone. "Did he give you a ticket?" I shook my head. "A warning?"
No.
He stood suddenly and started pacing. "This is insane. This isn't just a bad stop. This is harassment. And it's not legal. He can't just pull you over because you're wearing a damn pride pin." I said nothing. "You need to report this," he snapped, whirling back to face me. "Seriously, we can go to internal affairs or even get a lawyer involved. There are rights. You have rights." "I know," I whispered. Adam softened slightly. "Then why are you just sitting here?" I swallowed hard, pressing my palms against my knees. "Because it won't matter." "Yes, it will."
No, Adam.
"It won't," I said louder than I meant to. "He's a cop, a uniform, a badge. I'm just a..." My throat tightened. "A gay kid in a floral shirt driving a beat-up car. Do you know how that looks on a report?" He moved closer again, kneeling in front of me. "That's not just what you are. And you shouldn't have to stay quiet because some asshole thinks a uniform makes him untouchable." My lip trembled. "It's not about being quiet. It's about knowing how things work. You say something, and suddenly it's you who's dramatic. You who's twisting it." And he goes on with his life while you walk around wondering if every officer you see will treat you the same way, or worse. He exhaled slowly, pressing his forehead to mine. "You don't have to fight this alone." I looked away. Even if I said something, who would I say it to?
Adam hesitated.
"Your dad." The silence between us was thick. I hadn't mentioned him yet. Not tonight. I hadn't wanted to drag him into this. Into me. "He doesn't know," I muttered. "About tonight, I mean."
Adam nodded.
"Maybe he should." I closed my eyes. My father, Chief Logan Carlyle, was many things. Disciplined, sharp, respected. He loved order. He loved rules. And he loved me. I knew that. But part of me had always feared being his soft spot. His exception. He never treated me differently after I came out. Not harshly, not distantly. But there was a quiet shift. A silence around certain topics. A measured look when I wore certain things or mentioned Adam's name. I didn't want to be the reason he had to choose between loyalty and leadership. Between son and squad. But as I sat there, the words still burning in my ears, "Drive safe, princess," I realized something else. It wasn't just about me. It was about the next kid that officer pulled over. And the one after that. And the one who might not get away with just shame. I looked up at Adam. "Tomorrow. I'll tell him tomorrow." Adam nodded, squeezing my hand. "Good. Because someone has to remind him. I met his gaze. The badge doesn't make you right. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table staring into a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. I'd barely slept, though I'd managed to keep my promise to Adam. I'd make the call. But calling him was the easy part. Facing him, that was the mountain. Chief Logan Carlisle wasn't just my father. He was a name that held weight in this town, at council meetings, on courtroom steps, in community halls. He wasn't a man people questioned easily, or ever. And yet here I was, about to question the very people who saluted him. He arrived just before 10, wearing his off-duty jacket and mirrored sunglasses. Even in plain clothes, he carried himself like a storm waiting for the right cloud. I opened the door and gave him a weak smile. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, kiddo." He stepped in, took one look at my face, and removed his sunglasses. "Rough night." "Something like that," I muttered, shutting the door behind him. He followed me into the kitchen, settling into the chair across from mine. He didn't say anything at first, just waited, like he knew I needed to say it my own way. And so I did. I started from the beginning. The lights, the voice, the flashlight, the sobriety test, the insults, the pat down, the public spectacle. At some point, I stopped looking at him and just stared at the floor. I wasn't sure which part hurt more, the retelling or the fact that it had happened in the first place. When I finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. No flicker of pity.
No parental jug.
Just quiet, lethal focus. "What was his name?" he asked softly. I didn't catch it, but he was tall, buzzcut, maybe early 40s, drove Unit 67. He called me... I swallowed. He called me Princess. My dad's jaw ticked once. Unit 67. That's Officer Marcus Brent. I nodded. He stood, pacing once before stopping at the window. "I trained him myself," he muttered. 8 years ago, I put my badge on him. And this is what he does. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shout could have been. "I didn't tell you to get him fired or anything," I said quickly. "I just needed you to know." My dad turned around. "You think this is just about you?" I blinked. "This is procedure, son. This is law. That badge doesn't give anyone the right to intimidate, harass, or humiliate a citizen. I don't care if he's a stranger or my own damn child. And if Brent did that to you, he's done it to others." He walked back to the table and placed his hand over mine. Firm, not coddling. "We're going to do this right." I nodded slowly. "What does right look like?" "First," he said, already pulling out his phone, "I'm requesting the dashcam footage and body cam logs from last night's patrol. If he turned them off, that's already a violation." He paused, thumb hovering over his screen. "Did anyone record anything?" "I think a woman walking by did. She was on the sidewalk during the field test." He nodded. "Find her if you can. I'll talk to internal affairs. This needs to be handled quietly, until it doesn't." There was something in his voice that made me sit up straighter. I'd never heard him like this before. Cold, controlled, razor sharp. Not just a dad anymore, but a commander in the middle of a battlefield. "Are you mad at me?" I asked suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "For not telling you sooner. For not saying something last night." He softened just slightly.
No.
"I'm mad that someone made you think you couldn't tell me." That staying silent felt safer than speaking up. I nodded, looking down at the grooves in the wooden table. "You don't need to be anyone else to be respected," he added. "Not straighter, not tougher, not quieter. You're enough. You've always been enough." I looked up, throat tight. "Even when I embarrass the department?" He gave a short laugh, the kind that carried more pain than humor. "You didn't embarrass anyone. He did. The uniform's not what makes you honorable. It's how you wear it." He made a few more calls, formal, direct. No raised voices. Just codes, policies, and clipped instructions. Within half an hour, the wheels were in motion. An internal review request had been logged. Brent would be pulled in for an early shift briefing and informed of the inquiry. It was all happening so fast, and so quietly. "Why aren't you yelling?" I finally asked. I thought you'd be angrier. I am, he said. But fury doesn't fix broken systems. It hides the cracks. We're going to do this by the book. And when it's done, there won't be any cracks left for him to slip through. I didn't realize I was crying until he pulled me into a brief, warm hug. One of those rare ones he reserved for things that couldn't be fixed with words or rules. He pulled back and gave me a look I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Fierce, unwavering protection. You're not just my son, he said. You're a citizen. You're a victim. And you deserve justice. And for the first time since that night, I believed it. He wasn't just taking my side because I was his kid. He was taking a stand because what happened to me was wrong. And because men like Brent didn't belong in a position of power. Not anymore. Not after this. He messed with the wrong kid. 3 days later, I found myself in a gray-walled conference room with a flickering ceiling light and a coffee machine that gurgled like it was dying. Across from me sat Captain Reyes, Internal Affairs. He barely looked up as I walked in, just motioned to the seat beside my father and scribbled something on his notepad. My dad gave me a small nod, then turned back to the monitor on the table. A laptop was connected to the precinct's server. On the screen, paused at the 0-second mark, was the dashcam footage from Unit 67. Time-stamped, labeled, ready. Are you sure you want to see this? He asked me quietly. I nodded. I need to. He hit play. The footage started like any other boring cop video. Dashboard view, mild static, the quiet hum of the radio. Then the sirens flipped on. Lights flashing. The cruiser made a wide U-turn and followed my car. My little beat-up Honda, its brake lights flickering nervously as I pulled over. The car came to a stop, and for a moment the screen was still. Then Officer Marcus Brent stepped out. I watched myself through the windshield, unaware, too trusting. Hands on the wheel, head slightly tilted like I was confused. He approached the window. There was no audio for the first few seconds, until his body mic kicked in. You in a rush to your boyfriend's house? He said, voice dripping with amusement. I stiffened in my seat. The IA captain paused the footage and glanced at me. You all right? I nodded once. Keep going. The video resumed. I watched as I handed over my license, spoke calmly, followed every rule. I could hear my voice, soft, polite, holding back. Then came the sarcasm, the mockery, the sniffing around my car, the smirk. Drive safe, princess. It sounded even worse on tape than it had in person. But the hardest part to watch wasn't the words. It was me, the way my shoulders folded in, the way I blinked too much, like I was trying not to cry, the slight tremble in my hands when I got out of the car. It was like watching a version of myself I didn't recognize, one who had already started apologizing just by existing. And then the field test. Slow, deliberate, drawn out for no reason. I saw the couple walk by, saw the phone lift to record. I was grateful for them in that moment, though I'd never know their names. And finally, I watched the pat down. Unnecessary, lingering, a clear abuse of power. By the time the video ended, the room was heavy with silence. My father leaned back in his chair, hands clasped in front of his mouth. Captain Reyes stopped taking notes. He looked stunned, and he was IA. Stunned was rare. He falsified his report, Reyes said quietly. Said you were visibly impaired. Said you had slurred speech and appeared aggressive and evasive. I blinked. What? He wrote that you raised your voice and refused to cooperate. Said you couldn't walk straight and admitted to having a few beers with friends. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. It was bitter, sharp. He lied. On record. He did, my father said, jaw clenched. And he's going to answer for it. I stared at the black screen where the video had ended. My own reflection ghosted back at me from the monitor. For 3 days, I had replayed that night in my head, wondering if I was overreacting, if I'd misread the tone, if maybe, somehow, I'd exaggerated it in the haze of emotion. But the camera didn't lie. If anything, it made the truth even more brutal. He hadn't just been cruel. He'd been calculated. Captain Reyes clicked open another window, Officer Brent's file. 2 prior complaints. Both closed due to insufficient evidence. One from a trans woman. One from a teenage boy with no parents on record. And then me. I want to press charges, I said. My father turned to me slowly. Are you sure? Yes. Reyes nodded. He'll be placed on administrative leave today. Investigation will proceed. And I'll be reaching out to the other complainants as well. We may have a pattern here. I stood up. My legs felt steadier than they had in days. As I stepped toward the door, I paused. I thought I was the problem, I said quietly. But I wasn't. My dad rose beside me.
No.
You weren't. Captain Reyes gave me a respectful nod. Thank you for coming forward. Not everyone in your position would have. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I walked out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. The station felt colder than usual, like the air itself knew something was shifting. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful, but I did feel seen. And that was a start. The waiting room outside my dad's office always smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Sterile, official, unwelcoming. I'd been there once before, years ago, when I brought him a birthday card during a shift. Back then, I thought this place was invincible, unshakable. Now it just looked tired. I sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, dressed in a black button-down and jeans. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind myself I wasn't the scared kid on the side of the road anymore. Across from me sat Captain Reyes, quiet as ever, flipping through a manila folder. A few other high-ranking officers lined the wall, all serious, all pretending this was just another meeting. My father stood near the door, arms crossed. He wasn't in uniform, but he didn't need it. His presence alone carried the weight of the badge. Then the door opened. Marcus Brent walked in with a smirk. He had that same swagger I remembered, like the floor owed him for every step he took. His eyes scanned the room casually, clearly assuming this was some standard procedural slap on the wrist. Until his eyes landed on me. He froze. The smirk dropped. I didn't look away. The moment stretched, and for the first time he didn't know what to say. My father cleared his throat. Officer Brent, please have a seat. Brent nodded stiffly and sat 2 chairs away from me, noticeably more upright now. He glanced at Reyes, then back to me, like he was still trying to piece it all together. I thought this was a routine evaluation, he muttered. It was, Reyes said calmly, until we reviewed the footage from your traffic stop on May 3rd. Brent blinked. His voice caught slightly. Yes, the stop involving a civilian you falsely reported as impaired. The same stop where you mocked, humiliated, and conducted an unnecessary field test on someone who was not in violation of any law. Reyes's voice remained cool, clinical. And, as you've likely realized, the civilian you targeted is sitting right in front of you. Brent looked down, then up, then back down. Still no apology. Just quiet panic, settling in the corners of his mouth. My dad finally spoke. We're not here to debate facts, Brent. The video is clear. Your body cam captured everything. You lied in your report. You falsified details to justify a traffic stop that should have never happened. This isn't the first time, either. Brent straightened slightly, like a last-ditch attempt to hold some ground. Sir, You are being dismissed from the force, my father interrupted. Calm. Final. Effective immediately. Your badge and sidearm will be turned in before you leave this building. Brent's face went pale. You can file an appeal, Reyes added. But the Internal Review Board has already voted unanimously. We've also reopened 2 previous complaints with new scrutiny. I watched Brent shift in his seat. Sweat bloomed at his collar. He looked less like the man who called me princess and more like a boy caught cheating on a test, except this test had consequences far beyond a grade. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Every second of silence spoke louder than 1,000 shouted "I told you so's" ever could. Eventually, Brent turned to me, just slightly, like maybe, finally, he'd offer something resembling remorse. But all he managed was, I didn't think. That much is clear, I said, my voice calm and razor-sharp. You didn't think I mattered. My father motioned to the door. You're dismissed, Officer Brent. He didn't even correct him to former officer. He didn't need to. Brent stood, slowly, carefully, shoulders tight, and I stood too. We didn't touch. We didn't speak again. But when I moved past him, I saw it, the smallest twitch in his jaw, the flicker of something in his eyes. He was trembling, not like I had on the side of the road, not from helplessness or fear of violence, but from the one thing men like him hate the most, accountability. He walked out of the room in silence, followed by an escort. I exhaled, not relief exactly, but something close to release. Reyes stood and extended a hand. You did the right thing coming forward. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for a lot of others who didn't have the same chance. I shook his hand. Thank you for listening. My dad gave me a look as we walked out together. Not proud, not boastful, just steady. I didn't do this because you're my son, he said quietly. I know, I replied. You did it because I was right. He nodded. Still, I'm glad you're my son. That one hit me. I smiled as we stepped into the sunlight. The building behind us stayed cold, gray, and institutional. But out here, the sky was blue, open, bright, and I was no longer the kid in the driver's seat waiting for permission to feel human. This time, the badge didn't win. And this time, I watched him tremble. It's strange how quickly the world moves on from something that rewrites your entire life. Within a week, the headlines ran their course. Local officer dismissed after bias-fueled traffic stop caught on cam. Then came the community op-eds. Some praised the transparency. Others questioned how many times it had happened without a camera. A few commenters, hiding behind anonymous usernames, defended him, called it an overreaction, said I was too sensitive. But most people, they saw it for what it was, a line crossed. Brent's name faded from the news cycle after a few days. Mine didn't, not because I sought attention, but because stories like mine don't usually come with a resolution. Because most people in my position don't have a police chief for a father, or video evidence, or a witness brave enough to speak up. I got lucky, and I hated that part, because if it takes all this just to be believed, what happens to the kids who don't have it? That question stayed with me, kept me up at night, lingered in my mirror when I was brushing my teeth, whispered to me when I walked into campus and saw security guards watching students of color more closely, when I passed a group of kids outside a convenience store and saw the way they stiffened when a cruiser rolled by. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never really had been. So I decided to do something. I reached out to a local nonprofit that I'd heard of through Adam, a queer youth legal rights group called Breaklight. They offered legal education, representation, and emergency advocacy for LGBTQ plus youth who'd experienced harassment or abuse, especially by those in authority. At first, I just volunteered to sort flyers, fold brochures, do data entry. I didn't feel ready to share my story. But then, at one of the workshops, a boy, maybe 17, skinny, I shadowed, raised his hand and asked, "What do you do if a cop touches you and laughs about it, but says it's just a routine search?" The room went still. No one had an answer fast enough. So I told mine. I told it slowly. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told them about the headlights, the princess comment, the false report, the way it made me feel like I was less than human, like I'd done something wrong just by existing in a body he didn't approve of. And then I told them how it ended, with quiet consequences, with a trembling man who once smirked at me like I didn't matter. I didn't tell it to scare them. I told it to arm them, with truth, with the knowledge that it can matter, even if the road there is long and twisted. After that, they asked me to speak more often. Schools, shelters, even a podcast. I never called myself brave. I still don't. But I called myself prepared. And sometimes that's enough. My dad doesn't talk about the case much. I think part of him still carries a private shame, not because of what I did, but because the uniform he'd spent decades protecting had been used against his own son. And maybe because it took that personal cost for him to see how often it happens to others. We've grown closer in strange ways. There's still a quiet formality to how he shows affection. A hand on my shoulder, a second glance before he leaves the room. But something shifted after that day in his office. Now, when he looks at me, I don't just see a father. I see someone who respects me. Adam's been with me through every moment. He doesn't ask me to move on. He doesn't rush my healing. Some nights I still flinch when I see flashing lights reflected in a storefront window. Some days I replay that field test in my head like a scratch that won't fade. But most mornings I wake up knowing who I am. Not the trembling kid in the driver's seat. Not the name on a complaint report. Not even the son of the chief of police. Just me. And that's enough. Last week, I took a different route home from Adam's place. One that cuts through the neighborhood where it all happened. My hands still tensed on the wheel, but I didn't turn back. As I passed the spot where he'd pulled me over, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A new signpost, small, simple, bearing a blue plaque. This section of roadway is monitored by Public Safety and Community Watch. Know your rights. Stay informed. It wasn't a monument. It wasn't even noticeable unless you were really looking. But I saw it, and I smiled. Because maybe justice isn't always loud. Maybe it's a ripple, not a wave. Maybe it's someone hearing my story in a crowded classroom and deciding not to stay silent the next time. Maybe it's a kid walking into a police station with their chin a little higher because they know they matter. I used to think power looked like sirens and flashing lights. Now I know better. Power is your voice. The one they try to silence. The one they try to mock, belittle, or erase. But if you hold on to it, they can't win. I slowed at the light, looked in the rearview mirror. My face stared back, calm, steady. No flashing lights behind me, just the open road ahead. He tried to make me feel small. But the truth? That night, I wasn't the one hiding behind a badge. The road ahead is mine now. And I'm driving forward, no apologies.